you in a moment. So, Pat, are you there?
Yes, yes.
This is a money thing. Did you manage to send over the shekels for this class?
Yeah, I'll do it tonight.
Oh my God, you haven't done it. How dare you, Pat? You've got all this money. You haven't sent any money. Brilliant. Okay, fine. So,
Okay.
Jessica, anyway, nice to see you, Pat. You're looking healthy anyway.
I wish.
Carl, what's
Yes.
your email address?
Right, it's just try archaeologycymru@live.co.uk.
Okay.
So it's archaeologycymru@live.co.uk.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do, Jess, I'm going to actually make you I'm going to make you co-host. I'm going to disappear. Hang on a minute. I got something wrong with my screen a minute. Hang on. Right, here we go. Okay, Jessica, it's over to you. I'm going to go. You're going to have to finish the live stream or whatever. It's over to live stream. It's over to you, Jess. Anyway, night, and Pat and Jess. Nothing you want to say. And over to you. Take care. Night, guys. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Night.
Night.
How are you guys?
Okay, thank you.
Good. Any news off you, Anne?
Oh well, no, everything. Oh well, I had a really, difficult week last week. Well, 2 weeks really, full on everything. So much to do, and I haven't really, apart from doing my archaeology on, classes and my gender archaeology class. I haven't really I haven't heard any archaeological news.
Fine, Anne. Any news from you?
Nope.
No, that's fine. I haven't really got much at all myself, so I think we should just get into it today. I know you're going to the trip in March, Anne.
Yeah.
So just letting you know that there'll be an itinerary for that very soon.
Okay.
I've got the map, so I'm going to start planning.
Right.
I've got a few ideas. I just want to get all the little nitty gritty stuff, things that aren't on the internet. So we'll get into today's lecture if I can find it. It's just another mixture. I was going to do Anglo-Saxons in Wales this week, but I decided to do that next week. The research being much more bigger than what I thought it was going to be. So I was looking into some of the things that I was looking at the beginning of my master's course, and quite a few things that have really, I don't know why, but hoax, they really interest me. I think it's because we can learn a lot of lessons from them, and I think it also shows us how far archaeology and history has come. And we always talk about the fantastic discoveries, but we don't talk much about hoax. And I understand why, is because it's not the true archaeology. But I think it's important to just look at these hoax and see how they can give us a clear chronology of the development of the field of study, how it can give us valuable lessons, and how experts have been trained to look for those forgeries. And sometimes the explanations behind these forgeries is very simple, that we'll see today. But at the same time, if you're not sure what to look out for, you're a little bit confused. You're not really sure whether that's real or not, and they can sometimes pass. And we've seen that with some of our lectures quite recently with the Piltdown Man. A lot of people hadn't seen remains from that time period, and sorry, my sisters was talking then, it's kind of ruined my flow. But what I'm basically saying is that a lot of people didn't know what they were looking for with those remains, that especially from that time period, so they took it as fact. And I think this is what we see with a lot of forgeries here. There's one individual that we will talk about, and I couldn't get an image of his forgeries, but I believe that some things are being held by the National Museum of Wales. But I will talk about the individual and how they've had an impact. I think it's also important to talk about the impact as well. A lot of people asked me when we were talking about Piltdown Man, why would you want to forge something? For someone who loves archaeology, I think it can be very hard to understand why you'd want to forge something, but it's always down to wealth, financial gain, fame, maybe a little bit of power, but I think it can show how archaeology and history, just like the world of politics, can attract the wrong crowd. And we see this throughout history. Some of the things that we will talk about, one of them being a medieval forgery, I think it just shows how forgeries can be different and how they've changed throughout history. But I think it's very important to see how we spot that. So these individuals like Levi Roach, who's actually contributed quite well to some forgeries and manuscripts. And I think it can just be very interesting to look at this and see how the truth actually does come out thanks to the experts. And although these hoaxes can really affect the debate of a certain topic, maybe the validity of something, I think these experts prove that not only can they prove something to be accurate, they can also prove something to be false, and that we should listen to them because they're happy to actually test out a hypothesis in a very fair way. So the first thing I want to put on here that I thought would be quite interesting to actually take into account before we go into all of this is this really nice cartoon that I saw online, and I know you, Anne and Pat, can understand this. I know you've done these lessons with Carl for a while, and this is something that we always talk about. But for anyone that's watching online, I think it's good to just have a brief context of why context actually matters in archaeology and how they can really present something and tell us more about the landscape. So the first cartoon that we see here is that archaeology is not just about nice objects. I think it's not about treasure. And I think this is the issue, I think, with some metal detectorists. They want to find the gold or the coins, and I think they see it as treasure hunting. And it hinders, obviously, archaeology, but also hinders some metal detectorists that actually want to do good and actually report their finds. And to deal with something like that, the portable antiquities scheme has really taken off. They've really got metal detectorists and anyone that was walking about and have found things to understand that it's important to log these finds, where they are. And you have people like me who study their degree and they use that site. So the millionth item actually was put on there quite recently, which is fantastic because it shows how much it's grown. But this individual here is dug a hole and he's found this large bronze object, and he's put on this piece of paper here, if I can really look, it says function unknown, find location unknown, and the age is unknown. So we know nothing about this object, and I think when you have an object like that and you know nothing about, it doesn't have anything. I think when you find things out about an object, you're giving it identity, and identity is just as important for objects as it is for remains. So the way that person has said something about this bronze object, what does it mean? It means nothing. So what they're saying here is, where are these objects coming from? What do they mean? Who made them? Who used them? What for? And what did they end up? How did they end up in the ground? And obviously, you see here, this individual was using it as a shield, or was it using it as some way of worship, or is it using a way of digging another hole as well? So you can see those different purposes in that image, and your mind can go crazy when you have something unknown. So they give you another cartoon here, which is the documented excavation. I wish excavation reports actually did look like this, because I think it would just make it much easier to put things into perspective when you're reading it. So we have this documented excavation. If I can get my pen out. So obviously we see here the different purposes of that bronze object. And this is a documented excavation here. And this documented excavation, I'll get rid of that because that's awful. It is showing the layer of ash, is showing the occupation layer, is showing you the pit where these finds were, and even the post holes. Was telling you here that there was a structure, there was people living at this site. And when you compare it to just digging for stuff, which some people do when they metal detect, for example, where they just dig a hole, they haven't looked at the layers in the ground, they've just taken things, it's just a hole, it means nothing. You're not seeing the post holes, you're not seeing the layers of ash and occupation. It really does take away the identity of the object, and I think it makes it frustrating for anyone who wants to write more about this. And so I loved the way that they explained this here. This lone object that we're seeing is like an image that's been ripped out of a book, and the context of the whole book can give identity to that image. And so when you take away something without the rest of the context, that's when you lose its identity, you lose its meaning, and you're not sure what it is. So I felt like this was an important way to teach people about archaeology, why we document it the way that we do, how it can help us figure out forgeries as well. This will come into play with looking at layers. We'll also see how that this can apply to anyone metal detecting as well. I think it just shows how documenting everything, trying to keep everything as clear and concise as possible, really does help the expert and really does help the understanding of the area. I think it's not about the treasure, it's about what we can learn from it. And I think that's something that needs to be remembered by a lot of people that go into this. So if I go on to the next slide. So I just wanted to briefly go into a few forgeries that really have caught my eye in the past, and this was one of them, the crystal skull of, and it's very interesting, this crystal skull. So if I can just get my notes up on the crystal skull. So it's supposedly from Central America, and it was appearing in the antiquities market in the 19th century. And it was it was claimed that these skulls were made by the Aztec, the Mayan, the Toltec, and the Olmec civilizations. Again, it seemed like there was some context to this, but not a lot of context. And I think this is what was important, was that it wasn't specified where it was found. Therefore, we didn't know who made it, and we didn't know about the rest of the landscape. And quite a few people were arguing that this couldn't have been these civilizations because this is so advanced, this crystal skull. This must be from aliens. Aliens always comes into this. A lot of people have even theorized that these skulls at the time were from the lost city of Atlantis, and obviously the aliens things. But I think it was this idea, and I think it is very harmful, that the cultures that was thought to have made this actually didn't, and it just harms, I think, the perception that we see of that culture and its place in history. But no other single crystal skull has ever been found in an archaeological excavation in those areas. So when they were looking at recent research, it indicated that this was created by forgers in the 19th century. And again, it goes into the motives. I think a lot of people find it hard to comprehend why you'd want to fake something like this, especially when archaeology is all around you. When you know where to look, you can find something. And I think these people having such bold and really big claims to archaeology is what was bringing home some pennies. And you definitely see how this has brought a lot of people to question a lot of archaeology, but I think what we need to trust is the expert and even the scientists involved in this. This was the when we look at Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, it was like this idea that these skulls were made by someone else other than what we know. And it just seems to be brought into popular culture as well. But this photo shows a crystal skull that's kept by the British Museum. It's not ancient at all, but it was made in the 19th century, and it was made by humans and not aliens. And I think, again, it's just a reminder of to be wary and to be careful and to always be questioning your hypotheses when it comes to archaeology, because sometimes things can be different to what we know it to be. So I just thought that was a very interesting one to open up with today, because although that would have been a fantastic find, it's just a shame that it's not as ancient as we thought it was going to be. I wanted to go on to this one. This one was a very interesting one, and it was brought to my attention a while ago with my love for manuscripts. And we have a look at this forgery and the forged text of the Middle Ages. And this was Pilgrim is a Bavarian bishop, and he wanted to counterfeit his privilege to say that he had a right to rule, that he had the right to this wealth and this power. And you definitely see how in the medieval era, there's some of Europe's leading holy men are cooking up these reams of counterfeit documents. And you see how Levi Roche examines fabricated texts as well, and then why the practice was so popular. And I think it's so popular by the elite because it can tell us how they were able to manipulate people's perceptions of them. So the desire to deceive, the desire to be deceived, it's a universal thing. And the forging of documents is as old as writing itself. When we look at ancient Egypt with Mesopotamia, local priests that were the experts in literacy forged inscriptions in the names of earlier pharaohs and kings, which were claiming that they had the right of this better treatment, to be treated like royalty. And a society which was practicing how these individuals were sacred believed this based on these forgeries. So there's a few regions in history that can rival medieval Europe for the sheer scale of forging. But modern scholars have established over half of the surviving texts in the names of the Bavarian rulers of early medieval France and Germany, from about 480 AD to 752 AD. They were all, some of them were fakes. A third of them were those in the names of the Lombard rulers as well of northern Italy. And so you see how this is allowing figures to hold this true legitimate power. And there's nearly 2,000 documents also thought to be victim of forgery as well in pre-conquest England. Some of them haven't survived, but it seems that it was a very common practice at the time. And I think that's something that we always see with politicians, or we sometimes see with people who want to forge things in terms of, again, like we see with archaeology and history, but also other things that they want to forge things because it gives them some sort of gain. And it seems like in the medieval period, this was just somewhat of a common occurrence. And what we see here is that we see a lot of religious men, a lot of bishops as well, and abbots. We see the Bishop of Hereford. We see the Abbot of Gloucestershire as well. They were also involved in forgeries in some sort of way. And so this prevalence of forgery in the Middle Ages poses something of a paradox. How was an age of faith also an age of falsification? I think that's just an important thing to just put out there. So this is it shows that there's more than meets the eye here with some of these things. So in the age that we have today with fake news and political spin, I think we're better placed to resolve these tensions than earlier generations of historians were. And I think it allows us in this time that we are and seeing things go on with the media, it allows us to question things. And I think this is why we see these forgeries coming through as well. So the solution of these problems lies in the deep faith of the era. So in the medieval period, history was a moral exercise. The true past was which accorded with divine will, not necessarily that attested to by earlier documents. And so the most famous forgery of the Middle Ages was the donation of Constantine, is a case in point. So although it was produced in the 8th century in Rome, this was supposedly donations of the 4th century Roman Emperor Constantine to Pope Sylvester I. While the historical Constantine had made no such grant, it was believed that he had, and the donation largely put flesh on the bones of popular myth. And what we see with this case is the temptation to forge was heightened by this fragmentary nature of medieval records as well. So not even the papacy could boast a complete run of documents back to Constantine's day. But the situation was even worse. With these circumstances, they wanted to fill the gap of documents with their own name, or fill the gaps of documents with something to do with their family to give themselves the power. But I think at this time it was too great to resist forgery, and that it was important. So it was almost like forging at this time was a white lie. And it wasn't really. I think it was much more deeper than that, but I think it just showed how these bishops would sort of see it as a white lie for the greater good. So before the 10th century, it was quite rare to see forgeries, but by the 12th century it was rife. And it's this important moment of transition here that's represented by the later 10th century. The forging could be identified across the regions of Western Europe. And you definitely see how this is forgery was driven by new attitudes to local and institutional memory as well. So in the later 10th century, many abbeys and bishoprics first started writing down their own histories, often embellishing them with forgery. So this is why you always have to question things that are written down sometimes. And things that are written down can be really harmful because, again, it can be over-exaggerated, it could be lies, or it could be a forgery like this one, which we will look into the document in question in a moment. So this is, again, Pilgrim, Bishop of Passau, in the eastern, southeastern Bavaria area between 971 AD and 991 AD. And he was hailed as one of the foremost Bavarian noble families, and his uncle, which was Archbishop Frederick of Salzburg, was his intermediate superior within the in this religious hierarchy. And Pilgrim himself, he was educated. He was leading a local monastery, and he had spent most of his time studying under his uncle. But in his student days, he read quite widely about the history of the region, and now that he was bishop, he started to naturally begin inquiring of the history of his seat of authority, where he'd hoped to find evidence of this great and exalted past. He discovered little more than just scraps, and basically he wanted to ensure his privilege as being a ruler was kept in documentation. So when he was about to abandon hope, his attention was drawn to the fleeting reference in the later work of a bishop of Lord Constantinus, So he basically decided to go forging. And I think he definitely saw this as part of the greater good, which a lot of people would argue was quite harmful. And I think the people who were involved in the forging or any fake news seem to think it's for the better good, but it's just for their own good. So this is one of the documents that we have here. And this was one of the documents that's fabricated under his rule. And this is fantastic to look at because we can pick out some things here. So this is from the Arnulf of Carinthia documents. This is the ruler of Germany in the late 9th century. And he wanted to use this to create some weights. So he wanted to say that he was also involved in this. So we're just going to quickly, it's not a very good image of this, but I'm going to try and point out as best I could. One of the things that they found, which was this here, which was a C. It's quite hard to see, but it was a C. And this was thought to be just putting this C at the beginning of a medieval manuscript was to show that Christ was at the start of this text. But this wasn't this wasn't common until the 10th century, and this is meant to be, like I said, the 9th century. So again, this was the first forgery because this wasn't common until the century after. The next one was this entire top line here compared to all of the writing of the rest of the text. You can see how Pilgrim had copied earlier forms quite well, but his letters were quite taller and quite leaner than what we'd expect in the 800s, which was the 9th century when this was first to have been made. So again, that style of handwriting is also interesting to look at because we know a time period based on that. You can see that it's much bigger and more blocky than the writing down here below. The next one that I wanted to look at as well, there's a script that's going on here. So if I can quickly find the exact part, it's around here, this area here. Is basically this whole script here is in the same handwriting as Arnulf's, and especially from the same time, and it fits in quite well with the 10th century, definitely in the least half of the century. But we'd expect here a thicker pen nib. So although it was the same handwriting style of the 9th century, the pen nib wasn't as thick like it should have been for that time period as well. And we see that there's a bit more of a rounded aspect and pronounced curves to these as well. And you definitely see how there's similar hand styles and similar nib styles of the late 10th century, so a century after, which is also seen with Pilgrim's own work as well. So again, another telltale sign there as well in a forgery. And when you point out things, it does become very clear. This little symbol here, the royal and imperial monogram, it looks very accurate to the other seal that we have, and I will show you that at the end. But the real seal, the A is basically like this. Oh God, that was an awful drawing of a A, to be honest, but it connects down to a Y, if that makes sense. And then there's a line going on here and then a line going on that way. Basically, in the 9th century, the A and the Y is a little bit thinner. So it's a little bit thinner like this. And in the 10th century, it's a bit more thicker like the first one I've just drawn. So that was another telltale sign, was how different, even though they look the same, we just knew just from looking at how different they were. And also again, the nib was quite thicker than this as well. So you had the whole idea of the thickness. Again, this recognition clause that we see by here, again, very poorly seen on this computer. But this was Pilgrim's day. in Pilgrim's Day, this clause was the name of the chancellor responsible for overseeing this production of the text, and it would have normally been a separate line directly beneath the ruler's subscription. So he realised that during Arnulf's reign, different conventions prevailed, but he wrongly placed the same line under a slightly offset form. So what was meant to happen, he just put the for example, it would be a line like this, and then just directly underneath it would be the person's name. What Pilgrim did was that he'd done that line, and then on the same line he'd done the rest. Like, so that was one of those other hiccups. Really nitpicky you have to be with things like this. And the last two things I'll go through with this as well is another recognition sign, which was this little doodle he done here. It's roughly the correct form. But again, it's more chunkier than Arnulf's reign. There was an issue with the way the Latin was written. It's not what we would see in the 9th century. It was something that was abandoned by the mid-10th century. So again, this would have been very rare by Pilgrim's Day, and it just didn't seem to fit in with what we would have normally had seen. And finally, this lovely seal here. The seal is also lovely in medieval manuscripts. Basically, this was a very good impression of the seal that would have been made by Arnulf's day. But this was a very poor impression. It didn't look exactly like any others that he had. And it was, you could definitely see from comparing it to other ones, this was completely different. And Arnulf would have had a more regal looking stamp and seal back in its time. So you can see how things change in terms of that. And I just think what I want to just show here is that Pilgrim's a notorious forger. He forged quite a lot of documents as well, and he was allowed to keep up his power in terms of this. And I think it just shows how this world, there's always going to be deception in other ways more than what we think. If you are interested in that article, I do recommend looking at, it's online, Levi Roach's work. He works at for medieval history in the University of Exeter, and he really did a good job of discussing this as well. So if I move on to the next one. So I just wanted to bring us to a manuscript forger who we will know as Ilo Morgan. We can name him another name. He goes by two names. He has Edward Williams as well. So he has two names if you are researching him. And he loved forging medieval Welsh literature. I think it was his thing. But after his death, he was discovered to be someone who just forged a lot of documents here, and did a lot of discussion about him. So he was born on the 10th of March 1747 in Llancarnfan in Glamorgan, and he died on the 18th of December 1826 in Glamorgan as well. He was a renowned forger and collector of medieval Welsh documents, and he was the godfather of Meso-Druid phenomenon, which was greatly influenced by his involvement in Freemasonry. So he actually affected the theories and discussions of Druids as well, based on his false finds. So he was the son of Edward Williams, a stonemason, and I think this is why he's still called by the same name. He was born in Penmon, and he was raised in Flintstone, and he was claimed to have no formal schooling, but he learned to read while watching his father, a stonemason, carve words onto a gravestone. And he'd look up at his father's craft, and becoming a stonemason would learn to write poetry from local bards like Lewis Hopkins, Sean Bradford and Rhys Morgan. And he apparently took on an early interest in Welsh manuscripts, and he made friends with local collectors. Sounds all great. And I think this would have been a very inspiring story if he actually did find these fantastic things or had great discoveries. But unfortunately, his name's tainted. And you always find that these people, when they're discovered from forgeries, they always have passed away before they're ever found out. But in 1773, he left for London, where he met Owen Mather, I think that's how it's spelled, where he introduced to him the Society of Gwendigion, which this association would lead him towards editing a Welsh archaeological journal. When it came to 1777, he returned to Wales, and in 1781, he married and he attempted life as a farmer. And it was a failure. It wasn't for him. He decided to return to London, and he lived there from 1791 to 1795. And he conducted bardic ceremonies on Primrose Hill. So this is when we get to his literary involvement in 1789. He produced his first forgery, which was Bandonaeth David ap Gwilym, which, while a primary collection of the work of the great 14th century poet, also included a staggering number of poems that was found by Ilo here as well. But it was later edited by Owen Jones, and it wasn't hard to claim any number of poems that were by David. So this impressive element of his forgeries were good at capturing David's style. They can see that he really did understand the style of these writers. In 1794, he produced his first genuine works, which was poems, lyric, and pastoral. So he did actually produce his own work. And he had, again, in his archaeology journal in 1801 to 1807, he was one of the earliest printed collections. He handed in an early collection of medieval Welsh literature, but unfortunately, some of the works were his forgeries again. So this contributed to a misunderstanding in the literature and what we know of Welsh archaeology and even manuscripts. So it was the Welsh Triads, which was a fictitious book by St. Cadoc, and he did forge this. He forged the third one. So he put his name into all of this, basically. And he was a collector, but he was also a copier of manuscripts. And you can see that some of his articles that he's written, he talks about these manuscripts, and he gives them dates, and he talks about how they relate to other manuscripts and it fits to this time. You can see that he's really constructed this. And it's quite harmful, really, because he basically really affected the way that we look at Druids and how life was before the Romans, how Christianity came into play into Britain. He was wrong with everything, and it really affected the perceptions in this early study of history and archaeology. And so he just carried on with his forging of documents and creating these fake traditions as well within the country. So he created the Gorsedd, which is an assembly of Welsh poets in 1792, which again would have been good, and it is good because it brought together a lot of minds to bring their imaginations together. I think it's just a shame, really, because you can see how everything is tainted. And he's even claimed to have found a manuscript of Raglan Castle, which continued the works of Llewellyn Shwn, which was, again, he was talking about the institution going back into settlement of Britain. And it's just really infuriating, really, because when you look on assessment, you see that a large number of his medieval Welsh works began as early as 1868. And he even wrote about, for example, there's someone wrote about him called William Sken, and he wrote in his book, 4 Ancient Books of Wales, he wrote, and this is a direct quote now, so if I can get this up, it's particularly in attaching to almost all the documents which have been which would have been presented by the Church of Glamorgan. In other words, I know that then there was not any Welsh MSS contained under his collections, and they were accepted as based on his authority alone. He was not reasonable in allowing other experts to try and cure their suspicions in the work, and he was very discriminatory to allow anyone to use them. And so he kind of stopped people from viewing these fantastic manuscripts because he was scared of being discovered, and everything was under his investigation. So he had this this habit of this, where these forgeries were that were used to, but he would hide them under this idea of trying to preserve Welsh documents in history. However, he was just trying to preserve them for his own benefit, not so much the documents, and it just becomes very infuriating, I think, at that point. But again, a lot of people have talked about this, how he's been very he's left this legacy, really, and it was his forgery that left a legacy. And you definitely see how there's some books, some of them paint him out to be a monster, some of them paint him out to be someone that put Wales in history in some sort of way. But it's just really, really infuriating. A lot of people say that this was quite hateful for him to do, because this was literature that is tainted by what someone describes as his dirty fingers. And a lot of the original documents that he did have, that he copied, was given to the National Library of Wales by his descendants in 1917. But again, it just makes your mind run wild about what was the impact on what he said about Welsh history and Welsh manuscripts. What was the impact on that on Wales? I think one thing that is important to note here is that Ilo understood the importance of Wales in the discussion of history way before history and archaeology had taken off. And so again, this is something that we're trying to solve now. So it's just a shame, really, that he didn't find these fantastic things and that he forged them, because I think we would have had a much better debate, and I think it was just easier for him to do because he wasn't a fan of stonemasonry or even farming. And this is something that's on the National Museum of Wales collection. So this is an actual photo that's been given in by him, and you can see his two names at the top there, Edward Williams and Ilo Morgan. So these are things that you can see online. A lot of people have put things online for you to try and get a perspective, and on the back of this there is writing from his family saying that they had donated this to the museum, and that this is something that was passed down in their families as well. So I thought that was quite interesting, and I think that his career, really, you can see how he tries to have an input in some sort of way, and he even talks about he used his forgeries to even affect this idea of Druid practice and their traditions, and how he had a large number of manuscripts that he forged as evidence for his claims that these Druid traditions survived the Roman conquest, and how they were able to carry on. So again, I think this just feeds into what Karl would say, that we only have one documented source of Druids, and that's from Romans. And I think what we see with Edward Williams or Ilo Morgan is that he tried to forge these documents to say that there was surviving traditions of the Druids post-conquest. However, they were fake. So again, we're still waiting to see that evidence, and I don't understand why he went down that way. We never get a very clear understanding of all this. So I wanted to go on to the next one now, and I believe this is the last one before we go. So this was quite unusual. I have shared it quite recently. I just find hoax like this very entertaining. It's just laughable, I think, just from a glance, archaeologists know. And Time Team actually came to this site in Brecon Beacons, and straight from the off-go, archaeologists were not interested in this. They saw it as a big waste of time. They didn't want to get involved in any of this, but Time Team took it on. I think it just showed you that other side to archaeology, really, which which is what we talk about. So the name of the village is on the top of the screen there. And Time Team came here. So you see how Time Team, as they've dug up a huge amount of surprises, things that have really impressed us all. But they brought us to something. There was some people brand is quite boring, but I just see the comedic side of it, because these people sometimes are so delusional that if you are going to forge something, at least try and make it look realistic. So what we see here is that people will remember this episode if they have watched Time Team's episode, and this was thought to be Tony Robinson himself have actually admitted that this was his favourite dig of the show. So this aired in 2001, and there was this mysterious site that was meant to contain a bizarre cluster of significant historical features. And obviously what would be rude to not excavate. And I think it's quite interesting how this was done. So if I just sort my notes out. So basically, you see how they're here to solve this amazing mystery that's been on this site that seems to have so much archaeology. So it starts off with Tony walking down what is thought to be a Roman trackway or even a medieval trackway to this site before he stops standing with this big stone and something like this here. There, almost like what we see with Cornwall, and he says that this is a Neolithic megalith, something that if it was genuine, it would be 3,000 years older than the track that is standing on. So again, we're seeing something that's a bit of an inconsistency already. It's standing on a medieval or Roman trackway, but it's meant to be 3,000 years older than that medieval or Roman trackway. So why is it in the middle? Again, we're starting to see these hiccups. So then he points at this Neolithic tomb that they see as well, which is just meters down from a possible Norman watchtower and a chapel with early Christian symbols carved on the stonework. It's got everything for this site. It's got absolutely everything. And this site's actually described as the historical theme park by local archaeologists who actually refuse to do this dig. So the most fantastic feature as well on this site is this natural spring, where hundreds of Roman and medieval artifacts and coins have been found, as well as a collection of creepy stone-carved human heads, which have been perfectly preserved. Fantastic. So Tony's going, what the hell is going on here? Why have all these fragments of history and pieces of archaeology turned up at the same time? Why are they all here? And obviously Time Team only has 3 days to find out, so that's what they did. So they got there with their trowels, they ripped at the ground, and they were tipped off about the site by a neighbour, the landowner, who was intrigued by what he had seen. So it's like I said, there was no archaeologist who wanted to partake into this at the time, so it was down to Time Team. And I think it just shows how important archaeological scrutiny is in terms of things like this, because someone wants to have this claim of all this archaeology, this very unusual site, and archaeology is out there to bring the truth. So archaeology is out there to try and prove the truth. Although people argue that some of these things aren't true because there's fakes, I think we can prove that archaeology does aim to solve this. So they found Bronze Age axes, medieval coins, Roman figurines and brooches, lots of pottery, a spring, which is thought to be a rare holy site. But none of the documentation that they had fitted with this. So they didn't really have much of a historical background to the site, which again is problematic from the get-go. So basically, the owner actually didn't turn up for the interview. I think he knew that he'd been caught out. But basically, they found that the landowner had tinkered with some of the stones, and he found these stones laying across the floor, and he was putting them upright. And you know, this is a little bit problematic. It just seems that he's hindered some of the perceptions of this site. But again, they started to find Neolithic pottery and tools, and it was just very weird. And then they found this very odd late Iron Age headstone, which was thought to be found somewhere that we'd see in France rather than Wales. And it was uncovered in the dig back at the tomb, where Phil finds some blue china as well. So this blue china, this blue and white china that we see in the later modern period, was mixed in with all these medieval parts. And then they found that there was this clay drainage pipe, and underneath these tombstones was meant to be from the Neolithic period. But they found out that these tombstones from the Neolithic period were placed there 30 years ago. During this roller coaster of an episode, they found a Roman brooch as well that was near the spring, and this is when they started to find what looked like a church hall as well there, but it turns out that it was a load of landowners' items, and it seemed like he just dumped everything. It just did not make sense. And if I can get another image up now to show you, if it wants to work. You can see them finding things here. Basically, on the second image, they found this sword. Now, if this is true, this would have put this area on the map. This is a very significant find, very exciting. This would have been an Iron Age sword that's really well preserved. But it found that with the barbed wire that was also mixed into the same pit, again, where context matters, they found that this was something that was placed there at the construction of the site in 1922. And you can see all those finds they had there. They truly believed that this was something that was placed by the people who owned the land. And you can see that during all of this, all these fantastic finds, it's just disappointing, really, especially with what they were finding. They found that the sword was buried in 1992, and it was, again, this is 2,500 years at the end of the Iron Age. So they even found that this was something that the experts shut down. They said that this wasn't anything true, that, again, this was blows to the legitimacy of the site. But this Roman spring that they had wasn't seen in aerial photography of 1972. So it's found that this was also made much later. And this is all in living memory. So again, what they're saying here is that archaeologists didn't want to investigate because they knew that there was nothing going on here. But they thought it was a very interesting episode to film. And I think so as well, because it would just be so weird finding all these things together. They found underneath one of the stone heads as well, there was this plastic tube sticking out underneath it. And so again, it was placed after that plastic tube was placed. And so it was much recent in its time. So a lot of people that have been involved in this, the owners, have now said that they don't accept responsibility. This has nothing to do with them. And so they're now pointing fingers at each other in the family. But I thought it was just quite interesting how Time Team gave attention to something like this. I think to just prove how they can prove things to be false as well as they can prove things to be accurate. And I think it would have been a very interesting and confusing one to look at, because look at all those finds there. This person did go through a lot of time and effort to bury these finds, to try and pass it off as something that was an archaeological discovery. So in summary, I think they are annoying, these hoaxes, but I think it just shows how science and technique of experts have been used to prove this analysis is real or fake based on what is there, and how fakes can be spotted, and so things don't go past experts. And I know these forgeries and fakes can also harm history and archaeology, especially how we perceive the people of the culture and the land as well. But I think, again, there is room for change in technology and techniques. I think this has been too harsh on archaeology to say that archaeology and history of the forgeries and them have brought harm, because I think the fields and the studies and the experts in these fields of study really do their hardest to try and give a voice to everyone and bring their history and the truth of their history to light. And I think Wales has his own interesting twist on hoax, quite entertaining as well. But it's clear the fame from some have stuck, like what we see with Edward Williams, for example. So if I end that now and I'll ask questions, Anne, is there anything that you'd like to ask or add this evening?
Well, I hadn't heard of any of the hoaxes, so it's all, you know, new to me, but it does show you that you know, you just can't believe everything you hear. I had heard of Iolo Morgan. Iolo Morgan. I thought he was well, I suppose I thought he was a writer. Well, I suppose he is a writer.
Yeah, he was a writer, but he dabbled in forgeries by the looks of it as well.
Yeah, I suppose he made up stories.
Yeah.
Myths and things, you know.
His imagination went too far.
Yeah, I think he had quite a following, or has today quite a following.
Yeah, it definitely, some people are still interested and have written books on him, and even museums seeing him worthy as being well, his finds being archived and put online. So I think he does have a following. I think people understand him for the work that he has done. But I think we also need to understand that he's also had a part to play in archaeology in a way that we might not want, but he has.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Anne. Anyway, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Pat, anything that you'd like to ask or add this week? Oh, you're on mute, Pat. I'll unmute you.
No, it's amazing. I didn't know there was anyone doing that type of thing. I suppose in all walks of life there are con artists, and he was conning people. So,
yeah, it's something that we've always had to deal with, I think, and I think it just shows us that we've always got to keep our eye out, even today, for these tricksters.
Yeah, there's always opportunities, you know, to deceive people, you know.
Yeah,
got the skills.
And I think definitely in this day and age, we need to be more wary. People seem to believe that if you have a photo of someone from the past and a quote next to it, then they must have said it. And it's not necessarily true. I know someone shared one taking the mick out of that sort of thing. It was a photo of Abraham Lincoln, and in quote it was, don't believe everything that you read on the internet. And I think it just encapsulated how people are happy to share things like that without actually knowing, but it was just mocking that sort of idea as well. And I think it just challenges us to actually look further, test out the archaeology, and question why sometimes we can't see things, especially if you're an expert or someone studying in that field. So again, it's interesting to look into because it can clear things up for the public. But I just definitely think they're just interesting because some of them are laughable. Especially that historical theme park in Brecon Beacons, it just makes you think how that person thought you could get away with it. But thank you both, and I hope you have a lovely evening. And I'll see you tomorrow, Anne. And take care, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone who's watching online on YouTube, please subscribe to this account. We post a lot every week, discussing many topics that are quite intriguing, quite strange, and we love that. We love things that aren't easily accessible online. But yes, if you follow this account, give it a like, give it a share. It allows us to reach more people like you that are interested, and hopefully build a community. So thank you. And if you are interested, have a look at our online lessons, or try and book a lesson. We do have lessons in Lantwick Major on a Thursday and lessons in Bridgend where we talk about archaeology for 2 hours. So take care, everyone, and if you just want to keep sticking on YouTube and watching, that's great. And we'll see you next week. So take care. Goodbye. And Nostar.